The Forbidden Archive. Ambassador Crick stood before the sealed vault doors of the Grand Archive, his 4 hands trembling despite his best efforts to appear composed. In his 200 cycles of life, he had never been summoned to this place, the deepest chamber of the Valari Confederacy's knowledge vaults, where secrets too dangerous for common discourse were buried beneath layers of encryption and paranoia. You understand why you're here? Elder Vasmatha's voice echoed through the crystalline corridor, each word carrying the weight of his 12,000 cycles of existence. The council said I've been chosen for the Earth delegation, Crix replied, his primary voice steady even as his secondary vocal cords betrayed his nervousness with a slight harmonic tremor. They said I needed to understand something first. Not something, Vasmath corrected, his ancient eyes, all 6 of them, fixed on the young ambassador. Everything. Before you meet them, before you stand in their presence, before you speak a single word on their world, you must know what they are. What they've done. What they're capable of. The vault doors parted with a hiss that seemed to carry 10 millennia of withheld breath. Beyond lay a chamber that shouldn't exist, not according to any official record, not according to any treaty or accord. The walls were lined with data crystals, each one pulsing with a faint crimson light that Crix had been taught from childhood meant one thing, forbidden knowledge. Vasmath moved with surprising grace for someone of his age, his robes trailing behind him like the tail of some ancient predator. He stopped before a specific section of the archive, where 12 crystals sat separated from the others, each enclosed in its own containment field. 12 testimonies, Vasmath said quietly. 12 species. 12 civilizations that made the same mistake. Crix felt his respiratory membranes constrict. What mistake? They attacked humanity. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Crix had heard the rumors, of course, every species in the known galaxy had. Whispers in diplomatic chambers, warnings passed down through generations, cautionary tales told to military commanders who grew too confident in their power. But rumors were one thing. Standing before the actual evidence was something else entirely. The Krell Dominion, Vasmath began, activating the first crystal. A holographic display materialized between them, showing a species Crix didn't recognize, massive beings with exoskeletons that could deflect plasma fire, warriors bred for conquest across 300 generations. They encountered humanity 4,000 cycles ago. The humans had just achieved faster-than-light travel. The Krell saw them as primitive, ripe for subjugation. They attacked a human colony world called New Beijing. The hologram shifted, showing scenes of devastation. But the devastation wasn't on the human colony, it was Krell worlds burning, Krell fleets scattered like leaves in a storm, Krell cities reduced to radioactive ash. Within 2 cycles, the Krell Dominion ceased to exist, Vasmath continued. Not defeated. Not conquered. Erased. The humans didn't stop at military victory. They didn't accept surrender. They pursued every Krell ship, tracked down every colony, dismantled every station. When they were finished, 300 billion Krell were refugees scattered across the galaxy, their empire nothing but a historical footnote. Crix felt his legs weaken. That's impossible. Humanity doesn't have that kind of military capacity. We've reviewed their capabilities. They're advanced, yes, but they're not. That's what the Krell thought, Vasmath interrupted, his voice harder now. That's what they all thought. He activated the second crystal. The Zathir Collective. A hive mind species that had controlled 12 star systems and possessed biotechnology that could reshape worlds. They had attempted to assimilate a human research station, believing the humans' individuality made them weak. The humans responded by developing a counter-virus that didn't just kill the Zathir, it severed their collective consciousness, leaving billions of individuals suddenly, terrifyingly alone in their own minds. The Zathir civilization collapsed into madness within a single solar rotation. They created a plague of consciousness, Crix whispered, horrified. That's a war crime under every known convention. The humans didn't sign those conventions, Vasmath replied. Not back then. They wrote their own rules for warfare, and those rules had only one principle: total victory, by any means necessary. Crystal after crystal activated. The Morvac hierarchy, wiped out by human weapons that turned their own technology against them. The Thessian unity, their fleet destroyed by tactics so brutal that even hardened military analysts refused to study them. The Ixian sovereignty, the Prelian hegemony, the Kormath empire, species after species, each one powerful, each one confident, each one now either extinct or so diminished that they existed only as cautionary examples. But that was millennia ago, Crix protested, grasping for some reassurance. Humanity has changed. They're part of the galactic community now. They've evolved beyond. Have they? Vasmuth activated the final crystal. The testimony was recent, less than 5 cycles old. A Yalthan pirate fleet, 30 ships strong, had attacked a human merchant vessel in neutral space. The merchant ship had been unarmed, carrying medical supplies to a colony suffering from plague. The humans sent no diplomats, filed no complaints, issued no warnings. Within 3 standard days, every single Yalthan pirate base in 4 sectors had been reduced to debris. The pirates hadn't even known humanity was tracking them. The humans had simply waited, watched, and when ready, struck with such precision and overwhelming force that the Yalthan pirate clans, organizations that had operated with impunity for centuries, ceased to exist overnight. They haven't changed, Vasmuth said quietly. They've simply learned to control it better. But the capacity remains. The will remains. And most frightening of all, the memory remains. Humanity never forgets an injury, Crix. Never. They may forgive, if you're fortunate. But they never forget. Crix stared at the empty air where the holograms had been, his mind struggling to reconcile what he'd seen with everything he thought he knew. Humanity was supposed to be emotional, yes, but also compassionate. Divided by endless internal conflicts, but somehow principled. They wrote poetry, created art, valued individual life in ways most species found inefficient. How could such beings also be this? Why, he finally asked. Why are they like this? Vasmuth deactivated the crystals, and the chamber returned to its dim, pulsing red glow. That, he said, is what you're going to Earth to discover. The Council needs to understand them better. We all do. Because the humans are growing stronger, Crix. Their technology advances faster than any species we've recorded. Their population expands geometrically. Their influence spreads through diplomacy, trade, culture, peaceful means. But beneath that peaceful expansion lies something we cannot afford to misunderstand. He placed one ancient hand on Crix's shoulder. You will go to Earth. You will meet them, speak with them, live among them. You will learn what makes them human. And perhaps, if we're fortunate, you'll learn the answer to the question that terrifies every elder species in this galaxy. What question? Crix asked, though part of him didn't want to know. Vasmuth's 6 eyes met his 4, and in them Crix saw a fear that transcended age, wisdom, or understanding. What will humanity become, Vasmuth whispered, when they finally stop holding back? The vault doors sealed behind them with a finality that sounded like a tomb closing. And Ambassador Crix realized that his mission to Earth had become something far more than a diplomatic posting. It had become a journey into the heart of the galaxy's greatest mystery, and its greatest threat. The journey to Sol. The transport ship Harmonious Accord cut through the void between stars, its quantum drives humming with a frequency that made Crix's inner ear membranes ache. He'd been aboard for 14 standard days now, and Earth, humanity's homeworld, was still 3 days distant. 3 days to prepare himself for what awaited. 3 days that felt simultaneously too long and not nearly long enough. He sat in his private quarters, surrounded by data screens displaying everything the Confederacy had compiled about humanity. Official reports, cultural analyses, economic projections, military assessments. All of it felt sterile and incomplete after what he'd seen in the Grand Archive. The report spoke of human achievements in art and science, their complex social structures, their paradoxical nature. But none of it explained what he'd witnessed in those crimson-lit testimonies. A chime at his door interrupted his thoughts. "Enter," he called, deactivating the privacy screen that blurred his windows. Captain Thelnara entered, her chitinous frame barely fitting through the doorway designed for species less formidable than the Crithian people. She'd been assigned as his escort and advisor, a veteran of 40 diplomatic missions who had actually visited Earth twice before. "You haven't been to the observation deck," she noted, her mandibles clicking in what Crix had learned was her species' equivalent of concern. Most first-time visitors to Sol systems spend every available moment watching the approach. "I've been studying," Crix replied, gesturing at the screens around him. Thelnara's 6 eyes scanned the displays, and something like amusement flickered across her features. "Vasmuth showed you the archive, didn't he? The 12 testimonies?" Crix's silence was answer enough. The captain moved to his window, activating it with a touch. Beyond, the stars streamed past in gentle cascades of light. "I remember my first visit to Earth," she said quietly. "I was terrified. I'd heard the stories, different ones than you, perhaps, but stories nonetheless. I expected to find a world of monsters wearing human faces." "And?" Crix asked, despite himself. "I found the most bewildering species I've ever encountered." She turned to face him, her massive frame somehow conveying gentleness. "They have festivals celebrating the deceased, Crix. They gather in vast numbers just to watch other humans compete in meaningless athletic contests. They create art depicting their own mortality and call it beautiful. They argue passionately about the correct way to prepare food, about sounds they call music, about patterns they call fashion." "That doesn't sound terrifying." "No," Thelnara agreed. "It sounds ordinary. Almost boring, if you didn't know better." She paused, mandibles working thoughtfully. "But then I attended a human ceremony they call a memorial service. One of their diplomats had died, old age, peaceful, surrounded by family. Humans from across their entire species came to honor this one individual. They spoke of his life, his achievements, his failures, his kindness. They wept. Ambassador Crix, they wept for one being out of billions." Crix waited, sensing she hadn't finished. "And then," Thelnara continued, her voice dropping lower, "the deceased's daughter spoke. She talked about how her father had survived something they called the Frontier Wars, a conflict with a species called the Vraks who had ambushed human colonists. She described, in detail, how the humans had responded. How they'd tracked the Vraks across 40 light-years. How they'd dismantled the Vraks' military apparatus piece by piece. How they'd made sure the Vraks would never threaten anyone again." "I've read about the Vraks," Crix said quietly. "They're not among the 12 testimonies, but I found references. They sued for peace. The humans accepted." "Yes," Thelnara confirmed. But the daughter explained why. She said her father had argued for mercy because breaking an enemy completely leaves no room for them to become friends. The humans had won so decisively that they could afford to be generous. She turned back to the window. "The same species that weeps for one lost soul is the species that can, when necessary, break entire civilizations. And they see no contradiction in this." Crix felt a chill run through his body. "How do you reconcile that?" "You don't," Thelnara replied simply. "You accept it as truth. Humanity is not one thing or another. They are both, simultaneously, without conflict in their own minds." She gestured to his screens. "Your data won't help you understand them, Ambassador. You have to experience them. Their contradictions are their essence." A proximity alert chimed softly throughout the ship. They'd entered the outer boundary of Sol system, still 2 days from Earth but close enough now that human traffic control would begin monitoring their approach. "Come," Thelnara said. "You should see this." Crix followed her through the ship's corridors, passing crew members from a dozen different species, all of them part of the diplomatic mission, all of them showing various degrees of nervousness or excitement. They reached the observation deck, where a handful of other passengers had gathered before the massive transparent dome that offered a full view of the space ahead. And there it was, Sol. A yellow star, unremarkable by most standards, neither particularly large nor particularly bright. But around it spun a system that had become one of the most significant in the known galaxy despite humanity only achieving interstellar travel 2 centuries ago. Look there, Thelnara pointed with one of her upper arms. That's Mars. Humanity's first colony world. They transformed an entire planet's atmosphere in less than a century, a feat our best terraforming specialists said was impossible with their technology level. Crix could see the red planet, its surface now speckled with green and blue. Massive orbital stations hung in synchronous orbit, each one larger than some species' capital cities. And there, she continued, indicating a different direction. The asteroid belt. Humanity has converted it into the largest automated mining and manufacturing complex in any known system. Millions of facilities, all coordinated by artificial intelligence systems that our best programmers can't fully understand. I thought AI was considered dangerous by most species, Crix said. It is. The synthetic wars of the Fourth Era prove that. But humans have integrated AI into their civilization in ways that should have destroyed them, and somehow they maintain control. Another contradiction. Thelnara's mandibles clicked with what might have been respect or concern. They take risks that would horrify any rational species, and somehow they make it work. The ship continued its approach, and more of Sol's system revealed itself. Massive shipyards orbiting Jupiter, their construction facilities visible even from this distance. Solar collectors forming rings around the inner planets, harvesting the star's energy on scales that seemed almost greedy. Defense platforms, subtle but unmistakable to trained eyes, positioned at strategic points throughout the system. They've fortified their entire home system, Crix observed. As if they expect an invasion. They don't expect one, another voice said. Crix turned to see Ambassador Quelix, a Meridian who'd been appointed as the delegation's military advisor. His crystalline body refracted the light from Sol, creating small rainbows across the deck. They're preventing one. There's a difference. Preventing suggests they think someone might try, Crix replied. Someone did try, Quelix said flatly. 70 cycles ago. A Crothian battle group, no relation to Captain Thelnara's people, despite the similar name, decided humanity was expanding too quickly, threatening their own territorial claims. They jumped a war fleet into Sol's system, targeting Earth directly. 47 capital ships, 300 support vessels, with the intent to force humanity into a territorial treaty by threatening their homeworld. Crix felt his respiratory membrane seize. What happened? The Crothian fleet was destroyed in 47 minutes, Quelix stated, his crystalline voice carrying no emotion, just fact. Not defeated. Not repelled. Destroyed. Every single ship. The humans didn't use their main fleet, they used automated defense platforms that the Crothians hadn't detected and Sol-based weapon systems that activated faster than the Crothians could retreat. By the time the human military proper responded, there was nothing left but debris. He gestured toward the defense platforms Crix had noted. Those installations you see? They're the public ones. The ones humanity wants visitors to see, to know about. Intel suggests there are at least 3 times as many hidden platforms, plus weapon systems we can't even identify. Sol's system isn't just defended, Ambassador. It's a fortress disguised as a garden. The observation deck had gone quiet. Even the crew members who'd heard these stories before seemed affected by hearing them again while actually approaching Earth. Why tell me this now? Crix asked. Why not during the briefings? Because briefings are abstract, Thelnara answered. You're seeing their home now. You need to understand that everything humanity does, they do with the memory of being the prey. Before they reached the stars, before they had these weapons and ships and defenses, they were limited to one world. Vulnerable. And that vulnerability is burned into their collective psyche. She pointed toward a blue and white sphere slowly growing larger in the viewport, Earth itself, still distant but visible now. That world down there. For millions of cycles, humans were just another species struggling to survive on it. They were hunted by predators, threatened by disease, challenged by their own environment. They were weak once, Crix. And they remember. Every fortress they build, every weapon they create, every alliance they forge, it all comes from the memory of being powerless. They swore they'd never be vulnerable again, and they've kept that promise. Crix stared at the blue world, trying to reconcile what he was seeing with what he knew. It looked so peaceful from here, so serene. White clouds swirled across continents and oceans, and he could just barely make out the night side, glittering with billions of lights from cities that sprawled across entire regions. They're not cruel for the sake of cruelty, Quelix added softly. They're not evil, despite what some species claim. But they are absolutely committed to their own survival and the survival of those they consider under their protection. Cross that line, threaten what they protect, and you'll face something that won't stop until you're no longer a threat. Not contained. Not defeated. No longer a threat, by any definition necessary. A human voice suddenly echoed through the observation deck's communication system, startling everyone. Volari Transport Harmonious Accord, this is Sol Traffic Control. We're reading your diplomatic transponder. Welcome to our system, Ambassador Crix. We're honored by your visit. The voice was warm, friendly, with an undertone of genuine pleasure. It could have been any of 1,000 species welcoming messages, polite, professional, cordial. Please proceed on the navigation path we're transmitting, the human controller continued. We've arranged for a diplomatic escort to meet you at the Mars orbital checkpoint. Safe travels, and we look forward to hosting you on Earth. The transmission ended, leaving only the quiet hum of the ship's systems. They sound nice, Crix said weakly, immediately feeling foolish for such an observation. But Thelnara surprised him by clicking her mandibles in agreement. They are nice, Ambassador. That's what makes them so difficult to understand. They genuinely are kind, generous, compassionate beings. They'll welcome you with open arms, show you wonders, share their culture with genuine enthusiasm. She turned to face him directly, all 6 eyes meeting his 4. But never forget what you learned in the archive. Never forget the 12 testimonies. Because that kindness, that compassion, that genuine warmth, it exists alongside a capacity for absolute devastation. The same human who will cry at poetry can pilot a weapon that destroys worlds. The same human who builds hospitals also designs planet-cracking ordnance. And they see no contradiction, feel no conflict between these two aspects of themselves. The blue world of Earth grew slowly larger in the viewport, beautiful and terrible and utterly alien despite its seemingly ordinary appearance. So how do I interact with them? Crix asked, the question he'd been avoiding since leaving the Grand Archive finally forcing itself out. How do I represent the Confederacy to beings who are simultaneously the galaxy's most gracious hosts and its most terrifying warriors? Thelnara was quiet for a long moment. Finally, she said, you be honest. You be respectful. You be genuine. Because if there's one thing humanity values above all else, it's authenticity. They can sense deception, and they despise it. But if you approach them with sincere intentions, if you treat them as equals rather than threats or tools, they'll respond with a loyalty and friendship that's unmatched in the galaxy. And if I fail? Crix asked quietly. If I somehow provoke them, offend them, trigger that other side? Then the Confederacy will lose an ambassador, Quelix said bluntly. But more importantly, we'll lose the opportunity to understand them better. And that, Ambassador Crix, would be the real tragedy. Because humanity isn't going away. They're not going to stop expanding, evolving, growing. The galaxy is going to be dealing with them for millennia to come. We need to understand them, truly understand them, or we risk repeating the mistakes of the 12. The ship began its deceleration burn, subtle corrections bringing them into alignment with the transmitted navigation path. Somewhere ahead, human escorts were preparing to meet them. Somewhere below, on that blue-white world, billions of humans were living their lives, creating art, raising families, arguing politics, pursuing dreams, utterly unaware that a terrified young ambassador was approaching their world, carrying the weight of 10,000 years of galactic paranoia. Crix took a deep breath, his 4 lungs filling and emptying in a rhythm meant to calm his racing hearts. 3 days, he said aloud. 3 days, Thelnara confirmed. 3 days until he set foot on Earth. 3 days until he came face to face with humanity. 3 days to prepare himself for the most important mission of his life. 3 days to learn if he would find friends or monsters. Or, as he suspected with growing certainty, somehow both at once. Part 3, First Contact. Earth hung before them now, massive and radiant, filling the viewport with blues so vivid they seemed artificial. Crix had seen hundreds of worlds in his career, but none had affected him quite like this. Perhaps it was the knowledge he carried, the testimonies burned into his memory. Or perhaps it was something else, something in the way the light reflected off those oceans, the way the clouds swirled in patterns that seemed both chaotic and purposeful. Final approach vector locked, the pilot announced over the ship's communication system. We'll be docking at Unity Station in 40 minutes. Unity Station. Humanity's primary diplomatic orbital facility, positioned in high orbit above the planet. Crix had studied the technical specifications, a marvel of engineering, capable of hosting delegations from over 300 different species simultaneously, each in custom-tailored environmental zones. The humans had built it in less than 3 standard years, another impossibility they'd simply achieved through sheer determination and ingenuity. Ambassador, Thelnara approached, her heavy footsteps barely audible on the deck plating. The human delegation has transmitted a welcome message. Would you like to review it before we dock? Crix nodded, and she activated a holographic display. A human face materialized before them, female by their binary gender classification, with dark skin and eyes that seemed to carry both warmth and calculation in equal measure. Her hair was bound in intricate patterns that Crix's cultural database identified as having African origin, one of Earth's many ethnic traditions. Ambassador Crix, Captain Thelnara, honored guests of the Valari Confederacy, the human began, her voice melodic yet carrying an underlying strength. I am Ambassador Sarah Okoye, Earth's diplomatic liaison for your visit. On behalf of humanity, I welcome you to our home. We are honored by your presence and eager to foster deeper understanding between our peoples. Her expression softened slightly, and Crix noticed something in her eyes. Was it empathy? Understanding? I know, she continued, that visiting Earth for the first time can be overwhelming. We are aware that our species has a complicated reputation among the elder races. We know the stories that are told about us, the warnings that are passed down. Some of those stories are true. Some are exaggerated. And some, I think, miss the point entirely. She leaned forward slightly, and the gesture felt intimate despite the pre-recorded nature of the message. We are not monsters, Ambassador Crix. But we are also not naive about what we're capable of when pressed. What I hope you'll discover during your time here is not just our capacity for violence, that part you already know, but everything else that makes us human. Our art, our dreams, our failures, our stubborn insistence on hoping for better even when the universe suggests otherwise. A small smile crossed her face. I look forward to meeting you in person. Safe travels for this final leg of your journey. The hologram faded, leaving Crix staring at empty air. She knows, he said quietly. She knows about the archive. About the testimonies. Of course she knows, Quelix replied from nearby, his crystalline form refracting the light from Earth in dancing patterns. Human intelligence gathering is frighteningly effective. They likely knew about your visit to the Grand Archive before you'd even left Valari Prime. Then why, Crix began. Why acknowledge it? Thelnara finished. Because this is what they do. They don't pretend to be something they're not. They know their reputation, and rather than hide from it or deny it, they address it directly. It's unnerving, but it's also refreshing. You'll never have to wonder what humanity is thinking, Ambassador. They'll tell you, often whether you want to hear it or not. The ship shuddered slightly as it entered Earth's orbital traffic pattern. Through the viewport, Crix could see dozens of vessels, cargo haulers, passenger liners, military escorts, scientific research ships. The variety was staggering. But what struck him most was how they moved, with a precision and coordination that suggested either highly sophisticated traffic control or an almost organic understanding of shared space. They've been spacefaring for less than 2 centuries, he murmured, watching a massive cargo vessel execute a maneuver that would have required years of training for most species pilots. How did they master orbital mechanics so quickly? They were pilots before they had spacecraft, Thelnara explained. They built flying machines while still bound to their planet's surface. They practiced navigation in their oceans for millennia before reaching for the stars. By the time they achieved orbit, they'd been preparing for it, in ways they didn't even realize, for their entire evolutionary history. Unity Station came into view, and Crix felt his respiratory membrane seize. The structure was enormous, a ring-and-spoke design that rotated slowly to provide artificial gravity for species that preferred it. But it was the details that struck him, the way the exterior hull seemed to shift colors subtly, adapting to the changing light. The elegant curvature of the docking arms. The gardens, actual living gardens, visible through transparent sections, green and vibrant even here in the void. They put gardens on a space station, Crix said, almost laughing at the absurdity. Wait until you see the inside, Quelix replied. Humans have an almost pathological need to bring life wherever they go. They can't stand sterile environments. Every human habitat, ships, stations, colonies, has living things incorporated into the design. Plants, animals, sometimes entire miniature ecosystems. They say it's psychological, that they need the reminder of home. I think it's more than that. I think they need to prove they can make anything livable. The harmonious Accord glided toward one of the docking arms, the approach handled by both their pilot and Unity Station's automated systems in seamless cooperation. As they drew closer, Crix could see the docking port's interior through the transparent sections, and there, waiting, were humans. Dozens of them, maybe more, all in various uniforms and attire. Some wore what appeared to be formal diplomatic clothing, others technical support gear, still others military dress uniforms. All of them looked excited. Like they were genuinely pleased to have visitors. They're smiling, Crix observed. All of them. Of course they are, Thelnara said gently. Humans love meeting new species. They find us endlessly fascinating. It's one of their more endearing qualities, their genuine curiosity about others. The docking clamps engaged with a series of mechanical thuds that resonated through the hull. Pressure equalization began, atmosphere mixing and adjusting to accommodate Crix's species requirements. The humans had clearly studied Valari physiology extensively, the environmental controls were already calibrated perfectly. Ambassador, the captain's voice came over the comm system. We've successfully docked. The human delegation is ready to receive you whenever you're prepared. Crix stood, smoothing his ceremonial robes with all 4 hands, a nervous gesture from his childhood that he'd never quite outgrown. His hearts, both of them, were racing at rates that would have concerned a physician. How do I look? He asked Thelnara, immediately feeling foolish for the question. But she didn't mock him. Instead, she carefully adjusted one of his collar ornaments with surprising gentleness given her size. You look like someone about to make history, Ambassador. Remember, be genuine. Be honest. Be yourself. That's all they'll expect, and all they'll respect. The airlock door opened with a hiss, and Crick stepped into the connection tube. It was only a dozen meters long, but it felt like the longest walk of his life. With each step, he could see more of the humans waiting beyond, their varied appearances, their different expressions, all of them focused on the airlock with clear anticipation. The final door opened, and Ambassador Sarah Okoye stepped forward, her smile broad and welcoming. She was taller than he'd expected from the hologram, though still shorter than his own 2-meter height. She wore robes that seemed to blend formal diplomatic wear with traditional Earth clothing, patterns woven into the fabric that caught the light in mesmerizing ways. "Ambassador Crix," she said, her voice carrying the same warmth as in her recorded message. "Welcome to Unity Station. Welcome to Earth's orbit. Welcome to our home." She extended her hand in the human gesture he'd studied, a handshake, a symbol of peaceful greeting and mutual respect. Crix reached out with his primary right hand, grasping hers carefully. Her grip was firm but not crushing, her skin warm against his scaled palm. "Ambassador Okoye," he replied, proud that his voice remained steady. "Thank you for receiving us. The Valari Confederacy is honored by your hospitality." "The honor is ours," she replied, releasing his hand. "I hope your journey was comfortable. I know interstellar travel can be taxing, especially over such distances." "It was illuminating," Crix said, choosing his words carefully. Something flickered in Okoye's eyes, recognition, perhaps even sympathy. "I imagine it was. Come, let me introduce you to our team, and then we'll get you settled. I'm sure you're eager to rest before the formal proceedings begin tomorrow." She gestured to the assembled humans, and they approached in an organized but relaxed manner. Each introduction was accompanied by genuine smiles, handshakes or other species-appropriate greetings, and what seemed like sincere pleasure at meeting him. A security officer who assured him that his safety was their highest priority. A cultural liaison who spoke passable Valari and seemed thrilled to practice. A xenobiologist who had 17 questions about Valari physiology and apologized for her enthusiasm. A junior diplomat who confessed this was his first major assignment and thanked Crix for being patient with any mistakes. They were so normal. Friendly, professional, slightly nervous themselves. Nothing about them suggested the capacity for the destruction Crix had witnessed in the archive. They could have been any species diplomatic corps, eager to make a good impression, genuinely interested in their guests, careful to observe proper protocols. And yet, Crix noticed details that others might have missed. The way the security officer's eyes constantly scanned the environment, cataloging threats that didn't exist. The subtle deference the civilians showed to a man in military dress uniform who stood slightly apart from the crowd. The fact that every single human here, even the enthusiastic xenobiologist, carried themselves with a coiled readiness, like springs compressed but not triggered. "If you'll follow me," Okoye said, gesturing toward the station's interior. "I'll show you to your quarters. We've prepared a section with full Valari environmental controls, and we've stocked it with foods from your homeworld. I hope we got the selections right. Our cultural database is extensive but not infallible." They walked through Unity Station's corridors, and Crix found himself constantly surprised. The passages were wide and well-lit, with viewports showing Earth below at regular intervals. But more than that, they were beautiful. Art hung on the walls, paintings, sculptures, installations that seemed to blend multiple species aesthetics. And everywhere, there were plants. Vines growing along support structures. Small gardens in alcoves. Trees, actual trees, planted in atrium spaces they passed. "We overdo it, don't we?" Okoye said, noticing his attention to the vegetation. "The plants, I mean. Every species that visits comments on it." "It's unexpected," Crix admitted. "Most stations are purely functional." "We tried that," she replied. "Our first orbital stations were just metal boxes with life support. But humans became depressed, unproductive. We need life around us. It's not optional for our psychology, it's essential. We evolved on a world bursting with life, and we carry that need with us wherever we go. They passed through a large atrium space, and Crick stopped involuntarily. A garden spread before them, not just a few plants, but an actual garden with paths winding between flower beds, a small stream flowing through carefully designed channels, benches where humans sat reading or conversing quietly. Above, a transparent dome showed Earth's curvature and the star field beyond. "This is the Remembrance Garden," Okoye said softly. "Every plant here was brought from a human colony that didn't survive. New Beijing, Horizon's Edge, Armstrong Station. Places we lost to various disasters, conflicts, or simple bad luck in a universe that doesn't guarantee survival. We tend these plants as a reminder of what we've lost and what we're still trying to protect." Crick stared at the garden, and suddenly the testimonies made a different kind of sense. These weren't monsters. They were beings who mourned their dead by growing gardens in space. Who carried grief so deeply that they needed living reminders of it. Who transformed loss into something growing and green rather than letting it calcify into mere anger. But they also, when pushed, destroyed civilizations completely enough that only testimonies remained. "I don't understand you," Crick said quietly, the words escaping before he could stop them. "I'm sorry, that was honest," Okoye interrupted gently. "That was honest. And you know what? Most humans don't understand us either." She gestured to a bench, and they sat together, the rest of the entourage discreetly giving them space. "We contradict ourselves constantly. We preach peace while preparing for war. We value individual life while creating weapons that kill billions. We mourn our enemies even as we destroy them. It doesn't make sense from the outside. Does it make sense from the inside?" Crick asked. Okoye was quiet for a long moment, watching the stream flow through the garden. Finally, she said, "We're a young species, Ambassador. We've only been truly self-aware for what, maybe 50,000 years. That's nothing compared to the Valari's million-year history, or the Krithians' 2 million. We're still figuring out who we are, what we want to be. And we're doing it faster than most species because we don't have the luxury of time." "What do you mean?"